Welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're delighted to have Adam Haney podcast. Adam, would love to get an intro from you for the audience and tell us who you are, where you're coming from, why you're here.
Yeah, so I'm the VP of engineering of a company called Invisible Technologies, and we provide operational excellence. So basically, what that means is that um, we do a combination of human and automated labor in order to be able to solve enterprise business problems. And most recently, what that's looked like is a lot of human data creation work for foundation model providers. So we're sort of the humans behind a lot of the really common foundation models that you see and interact with the large language models and things like that.
That's really fascinating. So it's an aptly named company, Invisible, because you're behind the scenes using the humans in the loop to train these foundational models.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, when you think about reinforcement learning through human feedback or supervised fine tuning, like all of the back end, foundation models are traditionally you have sort of a pre-training phase where you're training on textual data, and a lot of times that's the internet or books. There's a ton of different sort of sources: Stack Overflow, Reddit, Twitter, all of that, just different textual data. And then from there's an alignment phase where you need to make sure that the model is actually responding based upon the preferences of the creator. And that's definitely still a very human-centric process where you go through and sort of rank results that are coming out of a model in order to ensure that they're giving the best answers. And that's also the phase where you would sort of put some of the protections in place in order to make sure that models are not going to do things that you wouldn't want them to do. Like, there's probably information out on the internet about how to do really terrible things. And so you want to make sure that there's a phase through that alignment where the model is not going to spit out answers on how to do criminal activities or how to do things that we would not really deem societally acceptable.
Right. Now, is it so? Just for edification of the audience, I know a little bit about this stuff, but would love to discuss it and dive in. The first phase of training a large language model is sort of an unsupervised phase, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, you can sort of think about you're doing token prediction at a really, really large scale. And so there are several really common data sets. The most widely known one is called the pile, which is basically a combination of the common crawl corpus and several other, really large repositories. And one of the ones that I think is really interesting is actually when Enron was sued, all of their emails were released. And so that's actually a lot of the instruction following is sort of like a boss telling a worker, like, hey, go do this. That is text that goes into a lot of these large language models as well. And so that combination of a really large amount of text, whenever you're sort of doing that pre-training phase, you're blocking out different words and rewarding the model based upon its ability to be able to predict the word that's missing. And so really a lot of the large language models, I mean, it's more complicated than this, but I like to think about it or explain it to people as effectively like a really, really fancy autocorrect where you're sort of predicting a missing, portion of a sequence. And so that's the pre-training work in the unsupervised fashion that you were talking about. But then from there, you move into a phase where there are multiple different outputs that could happen. And so there's a stochastic process that's going on behind the scenes. And so there are multiple different completions that you could imagine based upon that random process. And so the reward model training is the phase at which you sort of select which of these different outputs do I want to reward. And so different models have different approaches. So like Anthropic notably is doing a constitutional policy sort of approach that then makes sure that the model's output uses that policy-oriented mechanism instead of maybe RLHF or some of the other, approaches to that. And so our human data work is the people behind that, where we're really following rubrics and following different criteria in order to ensure that outputs that are coming out of the model are sort of meeting the expectations of the researchers and model designers. And, like I said, we work with a lot of different research teams in order to help with that. And we've really separated ourselves, and carved out a niche in order to be able to do that kind of work.
So this is the fine tuning that we hear about. But in this case, it's the model builders who are saying, okay, these are some of the outputs we'd like to see. It's almost like fact checking, right? Like if I ask about World War II, then it should be able to tell me about that. And the human judges, like, are they just giving a thumbs up, thumbs down? This is a good response, this is a bad response, or is it more nuanced than that?
There are different approaches depending upon exactly what part of the sort of alignment phase that you're in. In some cases, we're looking at multiple different outputs of a model and then ranking them in order to help describe, this is the ideal output. In other cases, we're literally editing the output in order to give a golden answer. And then that also, bakes into the training process in different ways. So it kind of depends upon different researchers and different teams are going to have different approaches.
Kind of reminds me of how we teach children to behave,
It's so
right?
similar to how we teach children.
Yeah,
Like I actually I love that. Like, and even I think a lot about the fact that like alignment is really kind of like the socializing of a child. So like if you think about,
yeah,
I could sit down and read books and be I could try to learn about the world entirely through written text, but really so much of our interaction with each other is, from going to the playground and, going to parties and, interacting with one another. And really a lot of that alignment phase, I think, is really similar to that. And I know there are also a lot of people that are doing kind of like childhood development studies on models in order to inform the way that you think about sort of building up the different kinds of knowledge as weights are sort of, as you think about the order of training and you think about the amount of change that you allow weights to be calibrated as a part of that training process.
yeah. And so much of that is, developing culture. So you're basically culturing the model. I mean, there's a fact based thing here. Like, okay,
Right.
World War II started in 1941, and you said 1940, but really it started in 39 for the Europeans. So it depends on like context, right? And then, but also it's like kind of teaching the model how to behave as a
Yeah,
rational actor,
I think
which
the
is interesting.
the culture aspect is really really interesting because a lot of the things that we think about in terms of AI safety, like there's going to be a political or social point of view to the way that that model works, and so there is no single correct answer. Like there's no central point of social acceptable behavior. It sort
Mm,
of varies based upon your background, and
it's a
so I
gray
think that we're
scale.
going to yeah, it's
Yeah.
entirely a grayscale, and I think that we're going to end up in situations potentially where models are ultimately fine tuned or sort of fit into it, to fit the societies or the cultures or the people that are interacting with them. I'm optimistic that we're going to be able to find ways to not turn that into like a super filter bubble. Like, I think that like some of the recommendations and ranking stuff that we've seen in the past, even with stuff like Google searches or newsfeed algorithms, have led to a situation where people are kind of insulated. And so I think that there's a lot of really interesting debate around AI ethics in terms of like how do we help to make sure that these models are aligned and working safely and that they're sort of following our societal expectations for how we want
Mm.
to interact with AI, but we don't all have the same expectations. So like, how are we going to overcome that? I think is a
Yeah.
really interesting and sort of formative, it's an interesting time to be alive. As we
Yeah,
sort of work through some of
reminds
this
me of
stuff.
the old phrase, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. We co-evolve with the technologies that we create, and um, it seems to me that we are shaping this tool and it's shaping us, and it's helping us understand ourselves better, which is really interesting as you try to instill into this artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
our culture. You really have to start thinking about how do we define that. And to your point earlier, I mean, there's scales to that. There's shades
Yeah.
of
I'm
like
really
right
interested.
and wrong, right? And it's really relative.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that's interesting to me is that we're starting to see with different techniques for interacting with these models that we can feed in context from different documents, and so I'm heartened by the fact that I think that this is not necessarily just going to be engineers writing code that help to align that, but it's really very much based upon the documents and the context that we feed into things, and so. For instance, you're starting to see language models where we might feed in government policies or just various different sort of ground truth of how we think society should function and then asking, so based upon this principle, how would you respond? And so within that, I think that whenever we're able to feed in context about our ethics or our way of life as a part of that, I'm heartened by the idea that we might be able to really change the way that we interact with government, be able to summarize sort of broad preferences of a population, that we might be able to sort of create personalized interaction at scale with the way that we make social decisions. And so I think there's really, really fascinating applications of tools like this. It's really a calculator for words, and I think that paradigm,
Mm.
is really going to lead to some really interesting human-computer interactions and really, like you were saying, evolutions of ourselves and our societies.
Yeah, I love that phrase. I never heard that. Calculator for words. It's a word calculator. That's really fascinating. And it kind of the thing I was thinking about is like kind of um, the token prediction versus
Hmm.
something like PageRank, which kind of changed the face of the internet 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Where it's just basically ranking pages based on keywords and sort of their association with that keyword and how many backlinks it had. And now you have this new kind of algorithm that kind of learns, right? It's a simple
Yeah.
algorithm that you send data through, and it finds the associations in thousand-dimensional space, of course, which we can't even
Yeah.
fathom what that looks like and what that feels like, because we can like think of like 7 things plus or minus 2
Yeah.
at once. And so it's like it's kind of looking at like the word love and how it kind of relates to 1,000 other things all at once, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, I love the way, I mean, so many of these, we're like you said, thinking of multidimensional representations of words and words that co-appear with one another. And so, I mean, I think back, this is like ancient history now, but like word to vec, whenever that idea sort of originally came out, it was like, happy and jovial are going to be sort of similar to one another in a dimensional space. And so that sort of concept of I'm going to learn the position of a word based upon the words that it kind of often appears with, and be able to intuit, the meaning of this, series of characters together, is really a fascinating idea. And sort of that application of like meaning and geometry together, I think is, really has just, I don't know, it's kind of fun intellectually to
Yeah.
work through. Yeah.
And then it turns into a different intelligence, right? Which is, we anthropomorphize AI so much, it's going to end up, trying to kill us all or taking over the world or whatever. But really, if you think about the way it evolved, it didn't evolve with the same scarcity on the savannah of Africa model that we had, right? Which was like this cooperation, scarcity model. Maybe opine on that a little bit and tell us what do you think this AI? What do you when it crosses super intelligence, which some people are predicting, hey, this is going to happen in a year or 2 or 5 years or 10 years. It's going to happen eventually. We know that now. I've been kind of watching this for a couple decades now, really since I was watching Star Trek and as a teenager. But like, what do you think this intelligence will be like, given it doesn't have the same biological substrate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that, to me, so much of this intelligence is the data that we feed into it. And so we've seen, for instance, where we've tried to come up with really complex models to predict recidivism. And those models, if you train on a particular profile of an individual and then you look at their criminal record and try to predict whether or not they're going to commit another crime, well, baked into that are all of the social stigmas that we have about each other and all of the, injustices maybe of the criminal justice system. And so because of that, the model then predicts and does the exact same thing that a biased human would do. And so similarly, like I think if you create a super intelligence and then you train it on, a corpus of all of the language that humans have ever created, you're really just creating a faster or more scalable version of the same things. And so I think that we are still going to have to work through, problems ourselves, and hopefully by being able to, be kind and fair and just, like we'll be able to get to a place where we can, build models where we're only putting, data that is the best version of ourselves. The angels of our better nature are going into these models. But like, I don't know. I mean, I think that
it reminds me of like information theory, right? So like this is a very fascinating concept, and I'm not a computer scientist, so you could probably explain it better to folks on the podcast. But basically, as long as you have over 50% signal to noise, you can get packets across the internet, right? Even if there's heavy degradation, right? And so like if you think about the signal being the things we like about humanity and the noise being the things we don't like about humanity, if we're training it and maybe that signal to noise ratio is 90 to 10 or 95 to 5, there are bad parts of humanity, right? There is that 5 or 10% or whatever that number is. Maybe it's only 1% or a fraction of a percent. I don't know. That, are nefarious and would, kill people and murder, rob, steal, whatever. And so, but I think there's enough signal, enough good there that if we're training AI on such high quality signal, which there's a lot of it, maybe it ends up being a very big force, gigantic force for good. I don't know. Tell me what you think.
I'm definitely, I mean, I'm an optimist. So, I mean, I think that we should be like, we should be aware of the fact that, if we are biased, then we are going to create models that are also biased. And I think there are some really smart people that are aware of those risks, even more so than me. And I'm optimistic that we're going to create things that really create abundance. And to your point about sort of scarcity on the Serengeti, like I think that abundance leads to an economic tide that helps all of us. And then I think that I loved Andreessen Horowitz' Techno Optimist Manifesto from a few weeks ago, and I think that
It's very polarizing. Did you see some of the backlash online?
I didn't see as much of the back. Maybe I should be careful here about. I read it as an individual and enjoyed it.
I'm a techno optimist. Like I've been that way most of my life. I grew up watching, like I said, Star Trek, and I believe of technology as a force for good, and it's been used for bad. Let's be clear. Like there's it's a double edged sword, but like I would say that one side is very sharp and the other side is kind of dull. And you can use technology for nefarious means, but it's also, I think on the arc of history, as Steve Pinker would argue, like it's been a very good force. And there's dangers going forward, but well, let's be aware of those and cognizant, but let's not let it stop progress.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think there are so many. I think as we understand our universe better and we're able to find efficiencies that that can certainly lead to abundance. It can also lead to oppression, but I think that it's important that we're able to. I don't think that you can put the genie back in the bottle. Like I think that we have to find a way to use those things for good, and that's again outside of the technology. That's just us, members of a society.
Yeah. So how many human judgments go into like a 70 billion parameter model, something like a ChatGPT-4 level model? Like how much human time? Because let's just kind of give people a sense of how big this is, right? Because I don't think people realize like how much time, energy, computation goes into training one of these models, and then how many human hours of judgment. Give us a sense of the scope here.
So, I mean, different models have different goals and they have different techniques whenever it relates to human judgment. But I'll just say, at Invisible, we employ thousands of people that are doing tasks. Regularly. We work with dozens of different foundation model providers, and so on the order of tens of thousands of hours of human time is going into the alignment of multiple different models. I didn't get any weeds.
Not to mention the, trillions and trillions of hours of all the content that were created.
Right.
And then,
exactly.
Yeah. And then give us a sense of the scope of the training here. Because I've heard of these training runs costing, I think Anthropic's latest model, they said cost like a couple $100 million or something like that to train, of, running these NVIDIA A100s or whatever they are for just months or weeks.
Yeah, so I will say that we don't directly operate some of the clusters that go into the compute side of the training. We're creating the data that then goes into those runs, but I've also read the articles that you're talking about in terms of, I think it's really interesting that a lot of the cloud providers are making investments into companies that are then turning around and using hundreds of millions of dollars in cloud services. And so in some ways, I think that a lot of this is going to turn into how much hardware do you have access? How many GPUs can you get your hands on? And then this is still, obviously there are a lot of refinements that are going into transformers and attention, but this is still a very much like how much metal, how much data can I throw at this problem in order to be able to build out these models?
Yeah. And I'm fearful for Anthropic right now because after, the ChatGPT Dev Day, OpenAI Dev Day, they've expanded the context window dramatically. And so now I can put this entire podcast in there and say, hey, write a description of this podcast. And I do that, by the way, for anybody listening. If you're reading the description of this podcast, ChatGPT wrote most of that. And thank you, ChatGPT. But, where do you think that leaves? It's just clear that ChatGPT is so far ahead as I use the 3 tools. And now with this kind of new version, GPT-4 Turbo, it just feels like they're just pulling way ahead now.
Yeah, I still think that there's a place for open source models. Like, I really think that what Meta is doing in that space is really important. And also, there are other, open source model providers. And so I think that it's definitely going to be an arms race. And I think that you're going to see situations where foundation model providers are creating different products or creating partnerships in a go-to-market fashion. So, I think that we're definitely hearing that a lot of enterprises don't know how to use these models yet, and they're still in a phase where there's a lot of proof of concept. So I think that there's there's going to be a big part of this that's just raw model performance, and then there's going to be a big part of it that's like go to market. How do we integrate these into other products? And in some ways, startups will fill the gap there. And we sort of saw that there were so many startups that were just API calls out to OpenAI.
You know what I like about that? Can I just wax poetic on that for a sec? You know what I love about that as an investor is it allows these non-technical teams or kind of shallowly technical teams to get out there and find product market fit really fast and then vertically integrate the stack.
Yeah.
So now they can hack stuff together. Yeah, make the API call. That's what, yeah, I know you have no moat here, but the moat becomes, somebody described to me as technological moats are over. What do you think of that statement?
Oh, man. I mean, I guess we are talking about like, maybe technological moats at a different level. Like I think that you're going to have, you have sort of a CapEx moat whenever you talk about the cloud providers. And so like they've made these like massive investments in hardware and real estate and, access to power in different scalable ways. And so that's certainly a moat. I think, you're going to end up in a situation where, you have foundation models that have access to more data and have also like accumulated, talent moats. And so because of that, I still think that like, you're looking at some of the, reading articles where researchers are signing like $5 and $10 million a year deals.
Right, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that headline.
And so like, so I mean, I think that there's definitely going to be a moat there in terms of like having access to the best and brightest people to create these. But then, I mean, I think it's just going to be layers in the stack.
I think there's layers of stack, right? So you got this, and I think about this as an investor. You have this infrastructure layer where there's very few winners, maybe 3 big ones, just like you have for cloud, right? And if you're one of those, congratulations, you've won the lottery. You just hit something.
Yeah,
that's because OpenAI, if they keep doing what they're doing, they're gonna join the trillionaire club. I don't know what to call that. The trillionaire club, the $1 trillion valuation club.
Yeah,
Tiki corns. I don't know. We'll come up with a good name. We'll keep.
You just need to coin an acronym and then put it out there, and then you become the guy that.
Well, you got your unicorns, you got your decacorns, and then I forgot the term centacorn, and then tecacorn maybe.
Yeah, it really rolls off the tongue, but I think you're right. I think you're onto something.
Yeah, so it's like a tecacorn, right? It's just this $1 trillion company, and you get 1 or 2 of those every 10 or 20 years, right? Like I guess there's 7 that have come out of Silicon Valley in the last 25 years that became $1 trillion companies. And like I say, well, the United States, because you got to include Seattle in that. Where I'm from, by the way. Thanks, Seattle. Any $1 trillion companies in New York? You're in New York, right?
I should know that, but I'm not.
Yeah,
I can't think of one off the top of my head. But you're gonna test my market knowledge and what the
market knowledge. It came from a headline. I think I saw it on Twitter. Somebody shared it. It was like $7 trillion companies in the United States in the last 20, 30 years. None in Europe, none even over $100 billion from Europe, which is, I think that just speaks volumes to our innovation economy here and our ability to keep innovating and generating companies. But back to the stack. So, you got these $1 trillion outcomes. And then you got the platform kind of companies. They build platforms like Slack or Salesforce. And these end up being really big companies as well, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. And up at the application layer, you got thousands and thousands of $1 billion companies. And that's where I like to play as an investor. I feel like it's a little easier. There's a lot more volume and a lot easier to find unicorns than tecacorns.
I totally agree. And I think that to your point about sort of finding product market fit and sort of helping to work through the go-to-market motion and just overall like find problems that can be solved. I think the lighter weight we can make that, the cheaper discovery becomes in order to find, opportunities in the economy. And so I agree, like, it's the same way that cloud allowed people that used to need to rack servers to be able to just spin something up and get started on a project, and being able to do the same thing but have AI power behind it, I think opens up just massive opportunities in the startup space.
And I think, to that point, I think we're seeing this, right? In the economy right now, where we grew 5% year over year, and everybody's scratching their heads like, how'd that happen? Like I thought we're in a recession, and unemployment's like super low. because I think what people have realized during COVID, I think accelerated this. I've been talking to people about this. Is accelerated this like, wait, I can go work on what I would love to work on, you know? And I have AI to kind of coach me through that, right? Some people have started AI guided businesses. They're writing books. They're creating videos. They're becoming creators, and I think that's sort of like
Yeah.
the future of humanity. Is we're all just creating things for each other, things like podcasts and whatever you like to create, right? And some people like you guys you're an engineer, you're a builder, right? So like you're doing what you love. But a lot of people out there are just kind of like punching a clock, right?
Yeah.
Before COVID, they're just like, oh yeah, just in the rat race, like, climbing the corporate ladder. And I think COVID kind of shook people awake a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that it broke our normal patterns, and then you end up in situations where people are at home. To your point, like AI reduces the barrier to entry for so many things. Like, if you wanted to put together a podcast and you needed a graphic designer, well, like, congratulations, now you've got Dolly. And then you wanted to sort of work through like what is your script or your positioning, and you used to need to sit down and be really strategic, maybe with a friend, or you needed to find an expert. And now all of a sudden you have sort of you have ChatGPT to be able to interact with and answer questions, and you're able to just continue to create things so much more quickly, as well as kind of overcome like the friction and sort of the getting started inertia that you need. And so I agree. I think that we're going to create a lot more things, as well as I think a lot of the drudgery is just going to be automated out of the world, which I think is going to be a real positive for human creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to work life. So you guys are a remote first company?
We are, yeah.
Yeah.
We're globally distributed. We have people in about 80 different countries.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, I
I mean,
mean,
is your team completely distributed as well?
yeah, so the engineering team, as well as really the entire company, are very distributed. We have pockets of people that really kind of mirror population centers that you would imagine. So there are about 20 of us that are here in New York, where I live, and so we are able to interact in person in that way. But overall, we've built the company for the entire lifetime of the company, where it's remote, and all of our, really everything, our strategies, the work that we do, everything is online, and all of our communication is through Slack and Zoom.
That's amazing. And tell me about some of the challenges of like running a team remote, and
Yeah.
what have you guys done? What are some of the ceremonies or traditions that you guys have created to remain a remote first company in the wake of like all these big tech companies calling people back to the office?
Yeah, so I'll start with challenges first, and then some things that we've done around them. So I mean, we are not just a remote company, but we're a globally distributed company, and so with that comes a lot of different time zone related problems. And so we've really had to set expectations. We're not entirely asynchronous, and so we have sort of core meeting and core collaboration hours. And so different people based upon where they are in the world. We communicate that as a part of the interviewing and hiring process, just that like, hey, there's going to be this 4 hour block during your day where if we need to, jump on a call, or, we're going to communicate via Slack, that we're sort of expecting people to be around. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be at their desk at home. Like people are, we have some people
Right.
that are digital nomads, but still we sort of have some amount of time where like if you need to be able to
Oh
talk
man,
to
to be
somebody.
in my 20s again and be a digital nomad, that would be, back when my wife and I were married traveling around the world, we'd have to move somewhere and we'd have to find jobs. Like this is like,
Yeah.
2005. So we, moved to the Caribbean after college, find a job, work on a boat, work at a restaurant, move to Japan, better teach English or something. But now you could kind of keep your career tethered to you, which
Yeah.
is
Our
really
head of
fascinating. Yeah.
our head of product has been a digital nomad with no address for 5 years, and he speaks 5 languages, and he just roams the earth. It's incredible.
Yeah. And it probably makes them a more engaging, creative person because of that, rather
Yeah,
than kind of
absolutely.
in the rote of like, okay, here I am on the 101 driving to San Francisco again for an hour in traffic kind of
Yeah,
person, oh, I'm on a beach somewhere in Mazatlan or whatever.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
amazing. Yeah, I love it. And I think a lot, and I've had people in my friend group, you know, I had a friend at Amazon, he's my brother-in-law actually, and they're like, oh yeah, you got to come back in the office. Like, wait, I haven't been in the office for 2 years. I bought a house out here, 3 hours away. I can't stay with you guys. if you're going to make me come into the office. We're like, nope, sorry, you're coming in. And so he left. And he got a nice gig that working with Facebook, and he's fully remote. And I think that's what's happening too with the economy is people are becoming more creative, and I think they're asserting a little bit more about their personal boundaries, right, between work and life.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that concentration in specific geographies around talent is really starting to break down. And so like that was something I built companies outside of the Valley for multiple years, and we really ran into situations at that point in time. I feel like some of the remote collaboration tools weren't as good. And I think also just it wasn't as normalized to have as much of a remote culture. And so I remember going and trying to recruit people and telling them like, hey, uproot your entire family and your entire life and move to this other city for this startup. And it feels crazy to me now that was something that we were doing regularly.
Yeah.
And so I think that just the talent mobility and overall, when you're recruiting from literally anywhere on earth, you have a much better shot of being able to get the best people for the very, the specific thing that you need somebody to be great at. And so I think that it just opens up so many more opportunities for better matches, both in terms of people and the career that they're looking for, as well as the need that a company has. And so I think that also is just going to be, fuel for more innovation and more productivity.
Yeah. So I didn't do this by design, but I had Cam Duty on the podcast right before this. So you guys are going to be back.
Oh, really?
Back. Yeah.
That's funny.
That was just a coincidence. I think we kind of got in touch around the same time somehow. But tell us about your kind of journey with Bellhop and, some lessons learned there and your involvement with Brickyard. And I think anybody who's listening to this podcast sequentially, if you haven't, you can go back and listen to the Cam Duty episode for context. But yeah, give us some insights on that journey.
Sure. I mean, so just to sort of set the stage, immediately out of school, I co-founded a company that was doing natural language processing for news. So we were doing named entity recognition over different news articles and trying to understand, news content and make suggestions to people about topics and events that we thought that they would be interested in. And I did that. There was a company at the time called the Lamppost Group in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that was making investments. And so they led our seed round. And I was the CTO of that company and grew the engineering team for about 2 years. It was a great lesson when we're sort of talking about go-to-market motion and being able to do, product-led growth. We ultimately didn't find product market fit. We built some really cool technology that I was excited about, but it's a great early lesson that it's not just about building cool technology. It's about actually being able to find a market for it. And so I was fortunate.
Let's dig into that for a little bit. So you built this NER system. And you were targeting the news market. And what was it about what you built that we weren't able to scale it up to bunch of revenue?
I mean, so at the time, we were competing with things like Google Reader and Pulse and Feedly and some of those companies. And so I think at that point in time, I was 21. It was my first role out of school, and being a co-founder immediately out of college, I think is a really interesting career experience. But we were able to go out and find users. I think that we really didn't have a great story around, we tried to charge users and we couldn't really get anybody to pay for something like that. And the market overall, a lot of the competitors in that space were just giving the product away because it was a complement to some other service that they were providing. And so we just, never really got to a place where we could, make a business model work, even though we were featured as a app of the week through the App Store multiple times. And, we were able to build up a pretty loyal user base, but we couldn't get them to then ultimately convert to pay for the service. And we also weren't at, the kind of scale where we could really like run advertising against it. And so there just wasn't really a great story around exactly, being able to fund a business out of it. But I think that it was a really interesting, learning opportunity. And also I was really fortunate that the group that invested in that company ultimately made it an investment in Bellhops. And that's how I met Cam and Stephen Vlahos and Matt Patterson. And so Cameron and Matt are now the principals at Brickyard.
And then, tell me about this journey with Bellhop.
Yeah, so Bellhop was a really fun ride. So when I met them, they didn't really have. They had already established a brand and they were doing really early moves. And so I guess for context, Bellhop it still is a company that helps people to move. And so it was a gig economy company. It started out when I joined, it was Campus Bellhops, and so it was originally targeted at dorm room moves and being able to, help people move in and out of their dorms, and then sort of expanded up market into young professionals moving in and out of apartments. And we're targeting people that traditionally would move themselves, and sort of trying to create a service on top of that, as well as, had a unique spin on the way that we would approach labor. So it was 1099, sort of gig economy workforce. And so we had
Uber for
that
moving.
Uber for moving, exactly. So thousands upon thousands of people across different cities, and at different times, there were upwards of 100 different cities that we were located in, and it's been a couple of years since I was there, but whenever I left there, we'd moved hundreds of thousands of people, and so through that time, I joined as the first engineer and really built some of the initial prototypes, and then helped to scale up. Raised the Series A and Series B, as well as helped to sort of stand up the engineering teams from just me up to about 35 people across mobile and web, as well as our data science. We did a lot of work around capacity estimation, demand forecasting, and sort of, we had some pretty mature growth teams in order to be able to understand the dynamics of the moving market across different cities, as well as, it's a very spiky kind of industry. And so you have a lot of seasonality of when people move. And so we also did a lot of different activations in order to try to do other kinds of lift and shift, labor tasks, and other sort of things that we could, work through in order to utilize that workforce. I haven't been there for a number of years. They've continued to mature and really grow in an aggressive way, but it was definitely a great experience to kind of go from first engineer all the way up to, a CTO of a team of that size.
Wow, that's amazing. And what was your team size when you left? And kind of
it was about 35 spread across sort of site reliability, the web application, mobile app, and then our sort of data science team as well.
What are some kind of learnings and mistakes along the way of like scaling a team to dozens, and from being a solo founding engineer to running the whole department and the whole show there?
Yeah, I think being a CTO at a company like that, really being a CTO of a startup at all, you kind of go through these different transitions. So, especially when you start as the first person, you are the engineer and you're really having to do a lot of work as an individual contributor. As you scale up into, a team of, 5 to 8, you're leading that team. Your role is still technical oversight, but you're managing that team. And then, whenever you get into the scale that we're near the tail end of my time there, you're a manager of managers, and you're really trying to think more in terms of like, what are the budgets and what is the overall sort of investment that we're making in different areas, as well as you start to need to put together more formalized systems for prioritization, planning, performance management, career ladders, and overall you need to move less from a tactical mode where you're, just putting out fires and helping to solve individual point problems, and more to a place where the system that you're building isn't technology, it's the people organization from there.
Yeah.
And so I think that the learnings for me, we did a really fantastic job, I think, in the early recruiting. And in fact, the early Bellhops team are still some of the best early engineers that I think I've ever worked with. In fact, I've been really fortunate that a lot of the early Bellhops team actually works with me at Invisible now. And so there have been some really great engineers from that team. But I'll also say I think that, there were places where we weren't as crisp in terms of the way that we approached planning, or the sort of things that, whenever it's your first company, they feel like they're bureaucratic, enterprisey kinds of problems. And I now, over time have started to realize the value in saying, like, we actually are going to have formal systems for, describing what our expectations of people are, and they're going to be written down, and we're going to have written principles. And it's not just going to sort of be, something that's very fluid, where we're relying a lot more on trust and a lot less on systems. And I think that, as the company progresses over time, sort of the level of system, sort of the freedoms that you grant versus the systems that you put in place need to be able to keep up with both, the maturity level of the team, as well as sort of where they are in their growth story. And I think in some places it was my first time as a CTO growing a team of that size. And I think that, in hindsight, there are places where there were definitely more systems that I would have put in place in order to make sure that people had grounding principles in order to be able to make sure that, direction and expectations were a little bit clearer.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I've gone through that transition as a manager as well, being an IC, then a manager of a small team, and then a manager of managers, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I guess I'm setting the org structure in place here, and
Yeah.
I'm kind of, and you end up being, handling a lot more fires and
Yep.
setting the cultural tone a lot more. And then, yeah, like you said, planning for resource planning, right? It starts to become like, what's the org chart look like, and what is the proper, resourcing for this project and stuff like that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, you start to set up formal systems for goal setting, for overall planning. Even how do you run business reviews of a particular department, and things like that. That I think might for somebody coming from a startup of 4 or 5 people, it's like what we have a monthly business review where we present to the executive team. Like feels very bureaucratic, but as you start to become a scaling enterprise, it's really important that you have those communication channels and that accountability is put in place.
So let's talk about some of your angel investing. I know you're an active angel investor. Tell us about how your experience throughout your career has informed your early stage investing.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been through at this stage, multiple rounds of being the first engineer and then being, that progression that we just sort of talked about in terms of putting systems in place. And so I think that my training is in computer science, and I'm an engineer's engineer. And so I really have a heart for people that are going through that transition from creating a really amazing piece of technology to running a business. And so I, really enjoy the act of working through, what are the systems that you need to put in place as an engineering leader? How do you think about the things that, maybe you didn't learn through a computer science education, but that are really important for being able to run a technology team? And so my angel investing, what I'm looking for a lot of times are bright and curious people. A lot of times I really like working with first-time founders because I think that I can provide the most value to them in terms of helping them to put those systems in place. And generally, I think that angel investing is a bet, it's a combination of a bet on a team and a bet on a market. And so I think in places where I have experience in that market, whether that's marketplaces through my experience at Bellhops or now through my time at Invisible, experience around AI, or other times, through my work at the house was very much centered around sort of live events and some of the work there. And so I think that places where I feel like I have a unique value that I can provide to the founding team, those are the angel investments that I'm the most excited about. Because I'm not just sort of a check writer. I'm not a massively high net worth individual. And so I'm not, sort of just casting out hundreds of different angel investments. I'm looking for angel investments where I think I can actually be impactful and helpful and sort of provide more than just a check.
I like that. Yeah, that's certainly a strategy. Let's do a rapid fire round. Tell us about your first programming language.
Yeah, I learned C++, and my very very first program was Conway's Game of Life. I had a friend that was doing research on cellular automata at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and he taught me how to program, and he was programming in C++, and so that's what I learned.
Wow, yeah, and that's for the audience. I never learned that one. Is that a tough language to learn?
I think it's definitely tougher than Python, but it's a good foundation to sort of understand systems programming.
Isn't Python just an abstraction of C++?
I mean, it's a scripting language that's interpreted instead of being compiled, and so I think that as you have different generations, it's Python's a little bit further from the metal in terms of speed. It takes care of more things for you, but it also you pay a cost for that convenience.
Right. What's your favorite AI application?
Yeah, I mean, so we talked a little bit about sort of the application of AI in governments. I read a really interesting paper recently where you had people that were polarized on opposite sides of political issues, and they were discussing that political issue through an LLM that had a prompt that sort of told it to help form your responses back and forth in the conversation following kind of discord. And so basically it turned the temperature down on the conversation and actually found that people's minds were a lot more apt to change in their understanding of different sort of political positions relative to theirs. When you sort of round off the sharp edges of people that have a different opinion than you, that you're much more likely to actually, change your mind. And so I think that, again, that the way that, we mediate our interactions through large language models or through AI is really fascinating to me.
That is really cool. And it goes back to that phrase, our tools shape us. That's a really interesting finding. I'd love to put that in the show notes if you can send it over.
Yeah, absolutely. I can send that over to you.
AI, there was another study I heard on Planet Money. I've mentioned it before, but where they implemented it in a call center, and large language models, ChatGPT or whatever it was, and it did not help the top performers perform any better, but it really
Yeah.
helped the bottom performers perform like top performers. And this is the first I've heard of AI actually increasing empathy and improving communications between people. So that's really and that's another positive sign to be optimistic about, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's like the same way that you might have a facilitator or a mediator in a human discussion. If you can sort of imagine an AI mediator, what a great application of ways for us to make sure that we actually, reach a midpoint that we can agree on and move forward from.
That is so cool. That is such a good harbinger of things to come. One word for startup life.
Thanks.
I like that. Yeah, move fast, break things. I think Jeff Bezos had a different way of saying it, but it was basically the same thing. Disagree and commit. Let's just disagree and then commit to the plan. And just move fast. Speed matters in business.
Yeah, I've seen before that people, whenever they're learning an instrument and they're trying to get better at it, that sometimes you set the metronome a little bit faster than you can actually play something, and it turns out that your skill increases really rapidly. And I feel like in the same way that a startup can really help you to grow and develop, whether it's your technology acumen or your understanding of business or a particular market. You're landed and really given an opportunity to research, learn, and grow really, really rapidly.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoy that part of the journey.
Yeah, I've worked at big companies and lots of startups and had a couple of my own, of course. And I feel like that decade or so that I spent in startup land was probably worth like 3 decades in big tech land, easily.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Startup years is what it's called. So if you had to choose one, remote versus office, for the rest of your career, what would you choose and why?
I'm going to find a middle ground and say in office for seed stage companies, and then remote becomes really, really great for Series A, Series B plus companies, just because you have such a great access to talent. But when you're still shaping exactly what you are and you're sort of learning the personality of the business, I think in office is really important.
Yeah, and then we covered that on the Brickyard episode with Cam. I mean, he's very ardent that, hey, if we're gonna write you a check, you're coming to Chattanooga for it until you get to Series A.
Yeah,
and that's
I think that's such a great model, and part of the reason I really believe in what they're doing at Brickyard.
Yeah, I was telling Cam this too. It's like every time I get a deal flow email, it's usually from Matt. I'm like, yep, I will take the call. And we're actually in diligence right now on one of them, and it's just an amazing company, just amazing founder. Essential software tool. What's a software tool?
Yeah, I mean, so for my work right now, I'm a heavy user of Notion. And I feel like our entire team is organized around that.
I haven't got into the Notion yet. Like I did convert a lot of my tables to Airtable because it's just so much more advanced, but I haven't quite removed myself from Google Docs, Word Docs yet. I'm still kind of using that because I just like the flexibility. I mean, the thing that I've seen Notion do is it kind of gives you this outline summary, and then you kind of open the things you want to read. What else does it do? What's powerful about it? Yeah.
I feel like it's like if Airtable and Google Docs had a baby.
Yeah.
So like you can create in Airtable it's bases, but in Notion it's just a database. And so similarly, you can sort of model the objects and the entities that you're working through. So we use it to we have a database of technologies that we're using that have different statuses in terms of like we're in research mode with this new library or framework. This is something that's widely adopted. This is something that maybe we're going to deprecate. And so being able to have a common place for our entire team to sort of say, this is the status of technologies that are in use. We also have an AI ecosystem where we keep track of all of the different AI companies and different AI models. And there's a database of that's shared. And so within that, you can also kind of have documents where we're doing write-ups and stuff like that. And so it's I think, a really nice mashup in between like a project management tool and a database and a document tool. So it kind of plays a lot of it solves a lot of problems that multiple different tools have solved for me in the past. I used to be a big Evernote user, and I've sort of fully replaced Evernote with Notion, as well as like I use Notion databases the way that you would use kind of Airtable databases as well.
Yeah, nice. Best book you've read recently?
Storyful. Storyful. Yeah, so it's by one of the grandmasters of the Moth Radio Hour, where he goes through kind of how to tell engaging
Hmm.
stories, and I think it's also a lot of the book is about sort of just being more present and kind of noticing the things that are happening within your life as sort of a story that's unfolding, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, nice. I'll check that one out. Angel investing versus founding. What gets your
Uh,
adrenaline pumping more? I think I know the answer, but
Yeah, I think it's going to be founding. I really enjoy being able to, work with founders and share experiences that I've had. But ultimately, you kind of have to be on the field yourself in order to
yeah.
really get your adrenaline going.
And I'm so glad there's people like you because I love having a venture firm. Like I love investing. And I can't imagine myself going back and being an operator or founder at this point. Um, but I'm so glad there are people who want to do that so I can invest in them.
It takes all kinds.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a symbiotic relationship. Um, Hobby unrelated to tech.
Yeah, I mean, so I've done several different things. I kind of dabble. So I over the pandemic, I did a lot of woodworking and really enjoyed that. I got my pilot's license over the
Ooh,
pandemic as well, and I've really enjoyed flying, although I don't get to do it as much in New
yeah.
York. And then my wife and I are both really big fans of the jam band Fish, and we go to a lot of Fish
Oh,
shows as
fish
well.
heads.
So yeah,
What do you
yeah.
guys call yourselves? The fish heads?
Well, that's what I think the name of the fan base. I don't know that I would self-identify as a fish head, but I think that's the term.
It's kind of the new Grateful Dead, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of the new great. Everybody follows them around. Sometimes I've heard of people like taking sabbatical and just following them around on tour for like 6 months or a year.
Yeah, I've met those people. I don't know if I'm that level.
Yeah, okay. You're like a level two. You guys have
Yeah,
levels.
exactly.
Dungeon
I think
master. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I think I don't know what level that makes me, but it's not that one.
Well, Adam, this has been a fantastic conversation. We could have easily gone for another hour. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, Brian, thanks for having me. It was great talking to you.